In a reported exchange with a theologian, biologist John Haldane was asked, what inference might one draw about the nature of God from a study of his works? Haldane replied, an inordinate fondness for beetles, referencing the fact insects are the most abundant animal group, and there are more kinds of beetle than any other insect. Haldane's reply might seem facetious, but it makes a serious point. Trying to infer the nature of supposed gods by studying the universe leads to random nonsense. Imagine an unknown artist produces a work of art. What can we conclude about the artist from the artwork? Well, in order to know something about the artist, we have to correctly interpret the artwork. If we use our own personal interpretations, we'll just be learning about ourselves, not the artist. The problem becomes clear. To correctly interpret the artwork, we have to know something about the artist. We're stuck in a loop. To know about one thing, we need information about the other. Likewise, if we hypothesize that the universe has some mysterious creator, then to know something about that creator, we would have to correctly interpret its creation. But that demands we first know something about the creator. Without any of this information, all we have are the wild speculations Haldane alludes to. For every observed fact about the universe, like the number of beetles or the number of stars, if we presuppose the existence of some creator that intended it to be that way, when we try to speculate on what those intentions might have been, there are just too many conceivable interpretations. For example, take the fact that countless animals die in fear and agony every day, mostly to feed other animals. Does that mean this hypothesized creator is a sadist that enjoys blood sports? Or a detached experimenter, observing this suffering without emotion? Or a breeder, throwing life forms into deadly competition with each other to breed the ultimate organism? Is this creator just some cosmic pyrotechnician that sees the universe as a giant fireworks display and views the life forms that fleetingly exist among the sparks as nothing more than bacteria? Or could it be unaware that these animals even exist? Could it even be unaware that the universe exists? What if the universe was merely the unintended byproduct of a completely different creation? Without any indication of intended purpose to all this suffering, we're stuck in endless conjecture. Wild as these speculations are, they're at least logically coherent. Concepts of creators that are sadistic or simply unaware of our suffering might not inspire us or uplift us, but they are consistent with the ruthless gladiatorial animal world in which we find ourselves. This is in striking contrast to the self-contradicting divine concepts found within organized religion. Bizarre concepts like all-merciful gods that shun children born outside of marriage, along with all their offspring down to the 10th generation. Or that vow to brand the noses of folks who dismiss its existence as a fairy tale. Mercy is defined as compassion or forgiveness towards someone we have the power to punish or harm. Vengeful gods that condemn people for natural skepticism or for the circumstances of their birth are by definition not all-merciful. It's no surprise that the logically coherent concepts and the self-contradictory concepts are generated by very different processes. While the coherent ones were inferred, the contradictory ones were merely asserted, confidently, forcefully stated as the truth by people called prophets, who make the most extravagant claim, a claim of access to special knowledge denied to the rest of us, knowledge imparted through unverifiable, mystical revelations. These are the human beings who design the world's religions, the storytellers who generate all the unsubstantiated contradictory detail we hear about gods, the detailed rituals, the detailed mythical histories, the detailed lists of bizarre, unjust laws. Without prophets, our thoughts about gods would be as shapeless and detached as our thoughts about pixies or elves, and would arouse just as little conflict and division. Instead, throughout history, prophets have provoked hostilities with the same supremacist message, condemning those who don't believe their stories as a subhuman underclass, and commending followers as the chosen elite. I want to look at a handful of prophets, some obscure, some famous, and explore the holes in their stories. But first, a brief word about self-reflection. Bogus ideologies of all kinds, religious, political, economic, social, can hook us in by force. Examples range from childhood indoctrination to forcible ideological conversion in prisons. But sometimes, we get hooked in because of some unfulfilled need within us. It could be a need to feel secure, to feel superior, to achieve social change, or something more ambitious, like a need to believe in an afterlife. Sometimes, when a bogus ideology comes along that promises to satisfy these needs, we're so focused on getting our needs met that we don't bother to properly examine that ideology. And Just like a hungry fish that doesn't examine the hook before biting, we get reeled in. Immunizing ourselves against manipulation begins with reflecting on our own needs and finding healthy ways to meet them. When we do that, we might even find that some of our needs are false. For instance, we might find we don't actually need to feel superior or to believe in an afterlife. In the first of 5 examples of bogus prophets, I want to show what we stand to lose when we entrust our needs to these individuals. Dorothy Martin led a small UFO religious group that achieved a measure of publicity in the US when she claimed that superior beings from a planet called Clarion had predicted an apocalyptic flood before the dawn of the 21st of December 1954. Her particular stunt was automatic writing, scribbling messages with a pencil, and claiming her hand had been guided by spirits. Her first message, a letter from her dead father to her mother about planting flowers in the spring, wasn't well received. Her mother told her to stop inflicting this upsetting nonsense on her. But soon, Dorothy was claiming to scribble messages from spiritual beings from unknown planets called Clarion and Ceres. One spirit, called Sananda, was later identified as the Christian Messiah, Jesus. Dorothy herself later claimed to be his mother, Mary. The Sananda messages were often phrased in archaic English, typical of the King James Bible, using terms like thee and thou. No one questioned why Jesus would communicate with 20th century Americans using 17th century English. Would we communicate with 20th century Germans using 17th century German? This archaic language made no sense whatsoever coming from such an immeasurably wise being. But it made perfect sense coming from a fraudulent prophet who wanted her phony messages to sound biblically grand, profound, and authoritative. Like the Bible, Dorothy's messages discouraged thinking, which she claimed had no advantage. Instead, she advocated inner knowing, which she said was achieved by believing the Creator's words. Here, I'll repeat one of life's rules, which could well be enough by itself to immunize us from prophets. People who don't want you to think are never your friend. Whatever the context, religion, politics, education, not thinking opens us up to all kinds of abuse. Dorothy's public announcement of the end of the world attracted over 30 followers, with 8 described as heavily committed. In addition, some observers recruited by psychologist Leon Festinger and his colleagues infiltrated the group to record its activities. In a surprise development, one follower, a former beautician called Bertha Blatsky, claimed she could channel Sananda too, with her voice. Festinger's observers described a faltering first performance, reporting that empty phrases tediously repeated came from her mouth. But Bertha soon got her act together. In the next meeting, she upgraded herself from Sananda to the Creator. Speaking as the Creator, she proclaimed herself to be the greatest prophet who ever was or ever will be. Her authority was undermined when, in her Creator persona, she tried to demand an obligatory group meeting, but was forced to reschedule by a member who couldn't make it. Imagine, the Creator of the universe having to bow to human availability. In a later meeting, she further asserted herself. Speaking as the Creator, she ridiculed the archaic English of Dorothy's messages, dismissing words like thee, thou, and shout as a waste of time. She belittled Dorothy's Sananda character and dismissed his supposed message about Dorothy being Mary. And Bertha dismantled other ideas and practices Dorothy had established, like the value of fasting. Bertha enjoyed her food. Dorothy must have realized the problem. She had previously told the group that a spirit message had confirmed Bertha's leadership role. If she denounced Bertha as a fake, that would undermine her own claims. She had failed to appreciate a basic principle of prophethood. Prophets are lone wolves. They seek to establish their own vision and don't play well with others of their kind, not even when they're claiming to represent the same gods. The two women were locked in an awkward alliance. But whatever their differences, while channeling their respective mythical entities, both women urged group members to make significant sacrifices, including quitting jobs and neglecting sick relatives. Members also drove for miles to witness UFO landings and alien visitations predicted by Dorothy that never materialized. These futile exercises were explained as spiritual trials. In everyday terms, waiting for something that will never happen is called wasting life. Prophets present it as a noble struggle, called testing faith. Finally, the 21st of December arrived. The group was told it would be taken up in a flying saucer before the flood killed the rest of humanity. They cut all the metal from their clothes, including zips and bra straps, which they were told would produce burns during spaceflight, and waited. After several uneventful hours, Dorothy scribbled a message saying the Creator had cancelled the apocalypse, supposedly because their little group had generated a force of good not seen since the beginning of time on Earth. It was a laughable explanation. One prominent committed member, Dr. Thomas Armstrong, had explicitly stated he wasn't interested in saving the world. Two other members, Cleo and Kitty, were heard concocting vengeful fantasies of violent destruction and anticipating having the last laugh as the non-believers drowned. This was plainly not an unrivaled force of good. Nonetheless, the group swallowed Dorothy's implausible message. Aside from just one member who departed, the rest were described as jubilant. Their commitment strengthened. The fact that their faith was reinforced by a failed prophecy might seem absurd to us, but we're looking at it from the outside, with zero personal investment. Dorothy's followers invested everything. They lost jobs, savings, and property. They neglected relatives, ended relationships, even shredded their own clothes. Get people to make sacrifices for a person or a cause, and they'll instinctively try to justify those sacrifices. The bigger the sacrifice, the greater the need to justify it. Dorothy's followers had to cling to the idea they'd save the planet. The alternative was unthinkable. This UFO religious group is a wake-up call for the rest of us to look at the sacrifices we make for the groups we belong to. Not just religious groups, but political and social groups. Sacrifices of time, money, education, career, relationships, integrity, freedom. What implausible stories might we accept without question to justify our investment in these groups? Faced with evidence of deception in our own groups, would we listen? Could we admit to being deceived? Or, like Dorothy's followers, would we find ways to deny reality? To admit we've invested in a bogus cause takes courage. To give it up and walk away takes strength. But to remain in denial could cost us everything we have. In her thirst for esoteric knowledge, Dorothy Martin once joined the Dianetics group. Dianetics was a commercial self-improvement pseudoscience based on a process called auditing, in which people respond to various questions and commands. It was popular in the US just after World War II and formed the basis of Scientology. Its inventor, Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, claimed it cleared the human mind of trauma. In this state of clear, people were claimed to gain remarkable powers, including total recall and mastery over all illness. Lafayette told his literary agent, Forry Ackerman, that he'd died on an operating table during the war. Rising up in spirit form, he had wafted incorporeally through a great ornate gate. On the other side, he'd found an intellectual smorgasbord, the answer to everything that had ever puzzled the human mind. Like a sponge, he absorbed this esoteric information. Lafayette claimed he'd been given a message for humanity, and over the next 2 days, he recorded it in a manuscript called Excalibur, but claimed that whoever read it went insane or committed suicide. On the grounds that it was too potent, Lafayette planned instead to publish it in diluted form. The result was his book Dianetics. He proclaimed it a milestone for man comparable to the discovery of fire and superior to his inventions of the wheel and the arch, and told one of his wives that he had high hopes of smashing his name so violently into history that it would take a legendary form, even if all books were destroyed. But in August 1950, his confidence was dented by an incident at the Shrine Auditorium, recorded by journalist Russell Miller in his book Barefaced Messiah. Riding high on the sales of his Dianetics book, Lafayette announced the world's first clear. A woman claimed to possess fantastic powers, including full and perfect recall of every moment of her life. With the words, "Will you come out now, please, Sonia?" he invited physics major Sonia Bianca on stage, to huge applause. She gave a speech in praise of Dianetics, but the audience didn't want speeches. They began shouting questions to test her perfect memory. What did she have for breakfast on a specific date years ago? Could she recite passages from the Dianetics book? At one point, when Lafayette was facing away from her, she was asked what color tie he was wearing. She had no answers. She couldn't even remember simple physics formulas. Audience members began laughing and walking out. Instead of opting for a conventional excuse like stage fright, Lafayette claimed bizarrely that by using the word now, when he'd asked her to come out, he'd frozen Sonia in present time, blocking her memory, a power that you could neutralize with a 3-letter word, didn't seem quite so remarkable. Her total recall was a total sham. And, based on his other claim of mastery over illness, Lafayette was accused of practicing unlicensed medicine. Within a couple of years, Dianetics had morphed into Scientology, with Lafayette repackaging his pseudoscience as a religion. He brought machines similar to lie detectors called e-meters into the auditing process to check subjects' reactions, and asking for proof was declared a suppressive act, a punishable crime. Lafayette now brandished the prophet's weapon of choice: blasphemy laws. When individuals or groups start to shut down and prohibit criticism and challenge, it's about the biggest possible warning sign in any context: religion, politics, education. It signals the onset of totalitarian systems. Stick around, and you can wave goodbye to successive freedoms. And with each freedom you give up, you can watch yourself regress into a powerless, compliant child. Former Scientologist and author John Atack has noted how members were bullied, berated, pushed around, and had their self-control taken from them. Fortunately, his own instinct when shouted at was to shout back, not realizing he wasn't meant to. This adult defiance seems to have been a key factor in his resistance to the group's undue influence. In over 60 years, Scientologists have failed to demonstrate a single case of total recall, mastery over illness, or any other special ability. But, unable to ask for proof, thousands of members have collectively paid untold millions of dollars, putting themselves through untold hours of auditing, in the hope of gaining the elusive state of clear. Decades after it was written, the supposedly lethal Excalibur manuscript was unearthed by Lafayette's staff. His household manager, Jerry Armstrong, reported that he managed to read it without going insane or dying. Accompanying documents also revealed that there was no operating table death episode. Lafayette's revelation was a hallucination induced by nitrous oxide inhaled during a tooth extraction. Mormonism was conceived in the 1820s by a young American called Joseph Smith, who claimed an angel called Moroni had told him about a book of golden plates buried in a nearby hill, along with two special stones called Urim and Thummim. Joseph enlisted a wealthy farmer called Martin Harris to participate in the bizarre process of translating the plates, which were claimed to be an extension of the Christian Bible. Joseph would put the stones in a hat and hold the hat to his face, blocking out the light. He claimed passages of text would then appear before his eyes, which he would dictate for Martin to transcribe. Joseph always kept the plates hidden. Sometimes a blanket or curtain would be hung between him and Martin. Magic stones were nothing new for Joseph. Before venturing into the prophet business, he tried his hand at money digging. Using exactly the same stone in a hat routine, he claimed he could detect buried treasure. In those times, buried treasure was often thought to be enchanted. Some believed that if forbidden treasure was unearthed, the spirits could make it sink down again out of reach. Money diggers could pretend to dig up treasure, then claim the treasure had been reclaimed by spirits, and still pocket their fee. Martin Harris's wife, Lucy, didn't believe the gold plate story. To appease her concerns, Martin asked Joseph if he could show her the 116 pages they'd so far produced. Joseph later told him that their god, Elohim, had denied his request. But Martin kept asking, and after his third request, Joseph said Elohim had granted permission to show the pages to his wife and a few relatives. Martin took the pages and showed Lucy and several others. Then, the pages were stolen. If the golden plate story had been true, losing the pages would have been a very minor setback. It wasn't as if they contained top-secret material. It was the New Christian Testament, supposedly a divine message intended for everyone. What did it matter if some thief or thieves got a sneak preview? The only real problem would be having to translate the golden plates all over again, repeating work already done. There'd certainly been no reason to panic. But if the story was false, and Joseph had made the whole thing up, losing the pages would be a catastrophe. And that was exactly how Joseph reacted. According to his mother, on hearing this news, Joseph wept and groaned and cried out repeatedly that all was lost. With no master template to work from, the lost pages couldn't be reproduced. If he tried to dictate them from memory, Martin Harris was bound to notice inconsistencies. In addition, the thief or thieves could produce the stolen pages at any time after the book was published and show the translations didn't match. After a period of reflection, Joseph announced that Elohim had instructed him not to go back and translate what he'd already translated. He said Elohim had told him that the thieves had altered the stolen pages, so that if Joseph tried to replace them, the thieves would use their false version to claim he'd contradicted himself. People would then turn against Joseph. He claimed Elohim just wanted him to carry on from where he'd left off. It was a story full of holes. Problem 1. There was no scenario in which it was in the thieves' interest to alter the stolen pages. If they believed Joseph had made the whole thing up, then they'd be expecting his second translation not to match their stolen copy. Altering their copy would be the last thing on their minds. Alternatively, if the thieves believed Joseph could produce another perfect copy, that meant they either believed his magical golden plate story, in which case they believed they were up against Elohim himself, or they believed Joseph had some other master version to refer to. If Joseph had a master copy, altering the stolen pages would be pointless and risky. Pointless because Joseph could reproduce endless copies of the 116 pages to prove he wasn't just making the text up as he went along. Risky because when the new pages were compared with the stolen pages, the portions the thieves had altered would come under special scrutiny, being the only parts that differed. Any sign of tampering would only strengthen Joseph's position. Altering the pages made no sense. Problem 2. An all-knowing Elohim would have known all along that the pages would be stolen, and that Joseph would ultimately not translate them again. The supposed authors of the golden plates were the prophet Mormon and his son, Moroni, who had visited Joseph in angelic form. So Elohim watched silently as the equivalent of 116 pages of English text was laboriously engraved in gold, all for nothing. Problem 3. The omnipotent Elohim is portrayed as strikingly impotent. He can arrange angelic visitations, reveal the secret whereabouts of magical golden plates, make text magically appear through a stone in a hat, but can't locate some bits of paper, or tell Joseph who stole them, or magically destroy them, any of which could remove the threat against Joseph and restore the value of Mormon and Moroni's hard work. Astounding how useless the gods suddenly become the moment any practical help's required. Problem 4. Elohim seems aware of how damaging it is to have his prophets suspected of deceit. So, why did he choose Joseph Smith as a prophet, knowing his future deceit would become a matter of public knowledge? When Joseph's Book of Mormon was eventually published, it contained some troubling problems. One example was a passage copied verbatim from the King James Bible. The trouble wasn't just that it was an exact copy, it was that both versions contained the same error. The authors of the King James Bible had written seraphims instead of seraphim. Just as cherubim is the plural of cherub, seraphim is the plural of seraph. If Joseph was translating from the golden plates, how could this happen? One Mormon apologist suggested that when the handwritten manuscript went to the printers, the typesetter might have noticed that the passage was from the biblical book of Isaiah and decided to work from the printed King James Version to ease his task. But that's not a workable solution. On reading this suggestion, I did some research to see if Joseph's original handwritten manuscript was available. It was, and it contained the erroneous seraphims. The Book of Mormon contained a stack of similarly damning problems, but there was worse to come. In the mid-1830s, some Egyptian papyri unearthed around 1820 came into Joseph's possession. From them, he produced the Book of Abraham, commonly considered the most important text in a Mormon canon called the Pearl of Great Price. But it was later discovered that the papyri were actually just standard Egyptian funerary texts, like the Book of the Dead and books of breathing. They had nothing whatsoever to do with Abraham. Joseph's translation was an unequivocal fraud. In their concern to impress the people of their own time, bogus prophets often exhibit great short-sightedness. It seems Joseph Smith had no inkling of the huge strides that would soon be made in the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphics. How have Mormons responded to this irrefutable deception by their prophet? Some have minimized the deception, characterizing it as a sincere but misguided invention. Some have downplayed the book's significance because it wasn't translated from the golden plates. Some have suggested the papyri could be legitimately read as both the ancient funerary text and the Book of Abraham, even though they can't map the Book of Abraham onto the hieroglyphics. Some have suggested the papyri merely provided an occasion for meditation, reflection, and revelation, in which Elohim revealed the life of Abraham to Joseph, without direct correlation to the characters on the papyri. Earlier, I asked a question about the implausible stories we might find ourselves accepting without question. In these denials and evasions, we see human minds determined to protect themselves from a profoundly painful fact. As with Dorothy Martin's followers, their personal investment has made the truth of their prophet's deceit literally unthinkable. In the concluding half of this two-part series, I'll be looking at two more famous prophets and drawing together some observations on all of these undeserving oracles.